Algebra 2, we're in lesson 10.3. We learned 3 trig functions, and we had SOHCAHTOA to help us know their definitions. All of these are really fractions or ratios. Like the SOH, you can see right down here, that was sine. S for sine. Sine of an angle was the opposite over the hypotenuse in a right triangle. The middle, the cos, CAH, that stood for cosine. You can see here in the middle, the cosine of an angle is adjacent over hypotenuse. Finally, TOA, T for tangent, and tangent of an angle would be the opposite side divided by the adjacent side. But let's read this little paragraph. Once you know these 3 main trig ratios, the reciprocal ratios are easy to use. They are cosecant, secant, and cotangent. And the memory device is one co-sounding word per pair. So sine of theta is opposite over hypotenuse. We could take the reciprocal and get hypotenuse over opposite. Sine has a reciprocal function of cosecant. Cosecant is abbreviated as CSC. So this is cosecant. And you can see what we wrote. The memory device was one co-sounding word per trig function. Here's sine, cosecant. So we move to cosine. We already have a co in it. The reciprocal of cosine will just be secant, and we abbreviate that by SEC. So the secant, SEC of theta, well, what's the flip of adjacent over hypotenuse? If you took the reciprocal, you would get hypotenuse over adjacent. Finally, tangent is opposite over adjacent. We'd have cotangent. Cotangent is abbreviated as COT, the cotangent of theta. This reciprocal would be the adjacent over the opposite. So what we're doing is we're just flipping the numerator and the denominator, and we've got these reciprocal trig ratios. Here's a little bit of review. Find the exact value of the missing side. Here's a right triangle, and we're going to use the Pythagorean theorem. We always isolate the hypotenuse. The hypotenuse is kept by itself. There's 9 squared. That would equal x squared plus 8 squared. 9 squared is 81. 8 squared is 64. And I'm going to subtract a 64 from both sides. And it won't take too long to see what we get. You are always more than welcome to use a calculator to get 81 minus 64. You can quickly see you're going to get 17. So you have x squared is equal to 17. You can double check if that works out when you take a square root. We're going to do that in a moment. The square root of 17 was a decimal. So we're not going to have a decimal here. We're just going to write radical 17 as our missing side. So that's really what we have for part A. But for part B, they want us to actually write out all of the trig ratios. And there's 6 of them. So I'm going to come back right here to this picture. And we're working from the perspective of theta. And we need to identify the opposite side, the hypotenuse. If we go directly across, you've got your opposite side right here. Go directly across from your right angle, that's your hypotenuse. This last side here is the adjacent side. And we're going to go back to SOHCAHTOA. And we can see that to write sine, we need to put the opposite side over the hypotenuse. And if you look back up here to this picture, the opposite side is radical 17 and the hypotenuse is 9. Now, the reciprocal trig ratio for sine was cosecant. And guys, what you can do real simply is just interchange the numerator and the denominator. Just flip it. That's really what you get for cosecant. Remember, this is sine. I'm not saying a co, it's just sine. And then I get cosecant as its reciprocal ratio. Cosine will have adjacent over hypotenuse. We're getting that from the Ka, the CAH part right here in SOHCAHTOA. We'll come back and you can see that your adjacent side is 8, your hypotenuse is 9. So we'd get 8 over 9. Now the reciprocal function for cosine is secant. And secant is just going to be its flip. Instead of having 8 over 9, you'll write 9 over 8. And that's what you get for hypotenuse over adjacent. So we've got 2 more trig functions we've got to deal with. For tangent, let's bring back SOHCAHTOA for a second. Tangent is always opposite over adjacent. And as you look here, your opposite is radical 17. Your adjacent, we just saw, was 8. So there you have it. One last one. The reciprocal of tangent is cotangent. And just flip that answer you just had. Interchange the numerator and the denominator. And that, of course, would be adjacent over of the opposite, adjacent over opposite. But there you have it, your 6 trig ratio.